This is a true story, narrated by the owner of the YouTube channel Mr. How Ghost Story. This story is titled The Devil Mother. If you haven't seen the previous parts, please start with part 1 available in the playlist to better understand the story. Continuing from the previous part, part 7 is titled Mysterious Monk, inviting everyone to listen attentively. The master walked on the dirt road, stepping over the stones as he approached the temple. His first impression, as someone who had vaguely sensed the spirits of demons since childhood, was of the eerie, silent, chilling, and gloomy atmosphere of the temple. Perhaps part of it was due to the temple being abandoned and unvisited for many years, but that was just a secondary reason. The real deterrent for the locals was the haunted space around the temple grounds. Even from about 200 meters away, the closer he got to the temple, the colder it felt compared to the village path outside. The bamboo grove made rustling sounds, with branches stretching out over the pathway, the wind stirring each leaf, creating haunting sounds. During the day, these were just sounds, but at night, it seemed as if someone was sitting there, wailing long mournful cries. It seemed someone had entered the forbidden grounds, and the wind grew stronger. The sounds from the bamboo became louder, and the air colder. The temple appeared before the master, desolate and ancient, with parts of the outer walls crumbled. Moss covered the walls extensively, and the temple gates were wide open, as if they had been untouched for a long time. As the master entered, the gate seemed to sway in the wind, creating unnerving noises. Inside the temple courtyard, everything was silent. He stepped further, pushing aside overgrown branches that obscured the path, and saw 2 large flower trees, where legends say 2 thieves had been hanged after desecrating the temple. Suddenly, the master startled when he just looked up at the branches of the flower tree and clearly saw a figure hanging from the branch. Blinking, he saw only the thick branches and gray moss. The temple yard was covered with dry leaves, stirred slightly by the wind. A terrifying silence prevailed, as if everything wanted to swallow any movement. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, the master suddenly turned around because it felt like someone had been watching him from somewhere. But there was no one in sight. Suddenly the master startled by a voice from behind. "Master, wait for me." "Where are you, master?" It was John's voice, who had been waiting outside but felt wrong letting his master enter the dangerous place alone. Thus, ignoring his master's advice, John had rushed into the strange temple. Seeing the master standing in the courtyard, John hurried over, panting. "I couldn't wait. Instead of waiting, I just ran in here." The master scolded, "Why didn't you listen to what I told you?" John replied, "How can I, as a disciple, let the master suffer alone? The temple looks scary, but there's nothing inside, just deserted because no one visits." But glancing at the 2 large flower trees, John felt a chill run down his spine. The master softly said, "This place is steeped in the aura of death. The stories the old landowner told aren't false. There were indeed 2 deaths here, and the body of one is still kept here, but let's leave that for later. There's a smell of decay inside, perhaps only recent. Could it be that it has started to devour humans?" The master advanced into the temple's main hall, everything subdued, dust-laden, and cobwebs intricately spun everywhere. The air was thick with the musty smell of long-accumulated dampness. John followed slowly behind his master to a room at the back, which seemed to be the former living quarters of the monk. A door was already ajar, and before even entering, a strong, fetid odor wafted out. The master, covering his nose, hurried inside. There, sitting on a wooden chair, was the corpse of a person who had died long ago. The body was emaciated, bald, dressed in monk's robes. Though it emitted a putrid smell, it was mostly intact. This was none other than the corpse of the temple's abbot. John stepped back, unable to look, while the master quickly left the room, his face filled with horror. He said in a frightened tone, "It's not safe here, we must leave immediately. This temple reeks of death because this abbot was once a practitioner of necromancy. He was like us." John, following and panting, asked, "But earlier, his body was clearly decomposed, master." The master replied, "Do you know why the villagers haven't seen him for years? Because he secluded himself here to practice necromancy. He was a Taoist priest who knew the art of necromancy, but I don't understand why he chose this place to reside. This is bad, everything makes sense now. I don't know how old he is now, but if I'm correct, when China was hunting necromancers to prevent disaster, he came here, shaved his head, and pretended to be a monk to avoid being hunted. It's possible that he killed all those who were at this temple. The rumors about the terrifying death of 2 thieves might have been his doing. And for decades, he's been on the verge of success. Tomorrow is the full moon. That's why he appeared today, but to possess the demonic body he created. As they ran from the temple, the duo paused to catch their breath, and John still had questions. Why do you know he is Chinese and knowledgeable about necromancy? Moreover, if he's been doing this for decades, how come the villagers haven't noticed things like missing livestock? Didn't you say if a revenant wants to sustain life it must absorb the life force of living beings? The master explained, that's if the revenant revives itself. But in this case, he is the one casting spells on the dead. If so, he can control the revenant to go out and buy anything without being noticed. I suspect that in recent months, as he was preparing to enter the final stage of possession, he started going out at night to gradually adapt to the new body. And why do I know he is Chinese? Because I am also Chinese. Moreover, earlier I saw the decayed body but no soul. When people die, their souls linger around their place of death for the first 7 days. As they walked and talked, John began to understand. So, does that mean he has now entered the body of the revenant and is hiding somewhere? The master nodded in agreement. Yes, this village is really in trouble. Facing someone who knows so much about spells, I might not be strong enough to resist. If he starts eating children, he will become fully human, which means he won't be a demon anymore. In other words, his body is human but with the strength of a demon. If so, the legend of a vanishing village in China could be repeated here. It wasn't the people controlling the revenant who were killed. It was the necromancer who entered the revenant's body and then consumed humans to become a demon. We must hurry back to the landowner's house. Before that happens, we need to warn them to move elsewhere. That house has surely caught his attention. The charms might be in place, but there's no guarantee they will hold. Hurry up, John. The master and his disciple hurriedly returned home as dusk fell. The master sought the homeowners to discuss the need for them to find refuge elsewhere for a while, given the current perilous situation. However, after hearing the master's words, the homeowners felt hesitant. Although they trusted the master's intentions, the idea of suddenly leaving their lifelong home based on the warning of a stranger seemed unreasonable. They asked the master for a night to think it over and promised to give their answer in the morning. The master said, "If you suspect that we are deceiving you, we will leave right now. I understand that my request is hard to accept, but there is another way. If you fear that we are trying to take your home, you could send your daughter to stay with distant relatives. You two can stay here, and if I cannot protect you, then the fault is not mine." Hearing this, the homeowner quickly knelt and pleaded, "We would never think that, but if possible, I would like to stay. Tomorrow morning, I will send my wife and daughter away. Would that be acceptable?" The master stroked his beard and nodded. The wife also wanted to stay but agreed to send their young daughter away from the village after hearing her husband's reasoning that if something bad happened, at least someone would be there to look after their daughter. John looked at the master and asked, "What about the other families with children here?" The master shook his head. "Fate has already been decided. We can't change that. As you just saw, even this family, who trusts us, still harbors doubts. How could we expect the others to listen? We must let fate take its course." Indeed, the villagers had already refused even the simplest protective charms. If they were now told that a demon was coming to devour people, they might well chase them out of the village. In any case, the master was only human, not a deity who could save the entire village at once. Human strength has its limits, and for days, the master and his disciple had been exhaustingly searching for clues. But what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. A practitioner of long-lost necromantic arts had appeared in a village in Vietnam, resurrecting a terrifying legend from an ancient text. A disaster was descending upon all the people here. That night, the master again stayed up all night, reading the ancient book by the flickering oil lamp until dawn. As the sun began to rise, the master's face was pale and his remaining black hair had turned completely white. When the homeowners knocked on his door to greet him the next morning, they were horrified at his appearance. Their little girl even screamed in fear. The master pulled out 2 red envelopes tied with shiny golden cords from his bag, handed them to the homeowner, and instructed, "Ensure your wife and daughter wear these at all times during their journey. But wait, I need you to agree to something." The homeowner eagerly took the charms and replied, Tell us what you need." The master continued, "May I have a little of your daughter's blood?" Part 7 has concluded. Please remember to subscribe to the channel to watch Part 8. Thank you very much. Goodbye and see you in the next video.